welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large, coming at you on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and with video on YouTube. However, this week I am joined by Jeffrey Augustine. So as usual, we will not be doing video on this particular version of our podcast, but thank you for coming around and watching on YouTube anyway. And Jeffrey, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we have some updating to do on this petition and some things to chat about regarding taxation, IRS, this kind of heavy, weighty government matters, as we are wont to do when we discuss things. So first off, let's hear about the petition.
Well, the petition is on change.org, and it's asking the IRS commissioner to begin an investigation into Scientology's tax-exempt status.
Mm-hmm.
And if you type in change.org and just search for Scientology, you'll see my petition. As of we're speaking right now, October 6, 2017, it has 10,192 signatures.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah. But I want to get it up to a couple 100,000 or 1 million, which is very doable, and I'm working on some PR things behind the scenes, which will come to fruition in a couple weeks. So,
ooh, now you're just being a tease.
I am, but there really is. The petition actually has gotten quite a bit of attention, and
yes.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot of attention. Interestingly enough, the question I get asked most often is, why can't the IRS revoke Scientology's tax exemption? And that's what I wanted to talk about today.
Yes.
And the short answer is that it's very hard to revoke the tax exemption of any church, not just Scientology, but any church. Why? Because in 1998, the U.S. Congress restructured the IRS. Now,
yes. And this is not broadly known about.
No, and that's why you have propeller heads like me who, dig down into arcane tax codes, and I talk to a lot of experts, Chris. I'm really glad they helped me. And very often they're generous in donating their time, and I appreciate their time because these are highly paid people, right?
Mm-hmm.
So here's how it worked. Prior to 1998, the IRS had 4 regional commissioners, and they could open an investigation into a church's tax exemption. They had the statutory authority to do so.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to have legal authority to do it. And these 4 regional commissioners could. Now, when the 105th Congress restructured in 1998, they eliminated these positions.
Do we know why that happened?
No, we don't. It's one of those things that may not have been on Congress's radar. It was a pretty sweeping restructuring.
Huh.
And, having worked in corporate life 30 years, I went through several restructurings, and sometimes things just get missed in a restructuring, and the IRS is a sprawling bureaucracy. So, no, we don't know why.
Okay.
And I can't speculate because I was not in the U.S. Congress at that time, nor have I ever been.
Right. As opposed to that time you were in the Congress.
Yeah. And I've only played a congressman on television.
Right.
So this was like a loophole. It created a loophole.
Yes, that's exactly what it did.
And the language of the restructuring is very specific, and it only allows for basically 3 people to call for a tax exemption.
And that is so interesting. That is so fascinating.
It is. Look at this. In the entire United States government, there's only 3 people who can call for an investigation into a church's tax exemption. That's the entire U.S. government.
Right.
Like, how does that even work?
Exactly. I mean, that's really, I don't think people generally realize that, because we get, well, how come the FBI doesn't look into this? How come this doesn't look into it? How come that? And it's like, when you really get drilled down into these kind of details, you find out all kinds of surprising things.
Well, yeah, you do. And this was really something. Now, let's assume that the church tax exemption wasn't on the IRS's radar.
Uh-huh.
and it just got overlooked. But it did create a loophole, and that's the net effect.
Yep.
So the Secretary of the Treasury can call for an investigation. But
Mm-hmm.
really, at the level of the Treasury, you're dealing with this, multi-trillion-dollar U.S. economy, global economy. It's Secretary of the Treasury is not going to do it. That's a cabinet-level officer reporting to the president.
Right.
He or she would push it down to the Treasury. So the Secretary of the Treasury would push it down to the IRS, rather.
Right. And here
It's
we're
like,
talking about Steve Mnuchin, right?
yeah, Secretary of the Treasury, Mr.
Yeah.
Mnuchin would push it down to the IRS. He could do it, but I'm just saying it's more than likely with everything he's got going on, he's going to push it down to the IRS where it properly belongs. That's
Right.
just delegation. An executive doesn't have time. $3 billion in reference to the U.S. economy's handling is nothing, right?
Exactly.
That's like worth 2 minutes of his time. So the IRS commissioner can do it. And that's really who we're asking to. That's the appropriate person to do it. And
Mm-hmm.
there is another person, the IRS commissioner of exempt organizations, could do it under the code. But you get into a maybe. And that's because of a lawsuit. And this gets into religion in America and tax exemption, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. In April 2007, there was a court case. And the IRS started looking at a church called the Living Word Christian Center. And they believed that Living Word Christian Center was, quote, improperly conferring economic benefits on its senior pastor, Reverend James M. Hammond, which may jeopardize its tax-exempt status, unquote, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So they believe the pastor of the church was getting improper economic benefits. And the lawsuit doesn't define those, but it could be, you could define that in a lot of different ways, right?
Yep.
So the IRS sent this Living Word Christian Center a note saying that we wanted to begin a tax inquiry. Now, the Living Word Christian Center got its attorney to send a letter to the IRS based on the 1998 restructuring, telling the IRS to go to hell in so many words.
Really?
Yeah, it said that because the IRS official who had sent the letter saying we want to open a tax inquiry was the director of exempt organizations examination, the DEOE.
Uh-huh.
And the church's lawyer said this person doesn't have sufficient constitutional authority to do this.
Really?
Yeah.
So they just flat out challenged him.
Sure. Yeah, they did. They just challenged the IRS. They said, go to hell. You don't have this person, this director of exempt organizations examination doesn't have sufficient constitutional authority. And we're not going to comply with your summons.
Interesting.
And the court upheld it because you have to have a, quote, an appropriate high-level Treasury official who reasonably believes that a church may not be exempt by reasons of its status as a church from tax, okay? Unquote.
Uh-huh.
Okay, now, this appropriate high-level Treasury official is the Secretary of the Treasury or any delegate of the Secretary whose rank is no lower than that of a principal Internal Revenue officer for an Internal Revenue region. Well, the court noted that this regional commissioner position had been cut out in the 1998 restructuring.
Mm-hmm.
So the court itself actually referred to the IRS Restructuring Reform Act of 1998. Congress didn't amend it. So the court can only act according to, what the law says.
Right.
So two things. If Congress amended the 1998 restructuring, it would be pretty simple just to put back in statutory language that says this is an act of Congress whereby we're reinstating the 4 regional commissioners and giving them authority to do the following: call for investigation into churches' tax exemptions. That would fix it. So
right.
it literally takes an act of Congress to fix it because the IRS can't do anything. It's not This is something Congress has to do. That's the way the
Okay.
law works.
Sure.
For people outside of America, you have to understand that religion in America is behind the First Amendment to our Constitution.
Right.
And so what the Congress has to do, the Congress can address these kinds of things. An IRS official can't. And you have to balance First Amendment religious protections over against tax exemption for a church. And you have to be sufficient level. You have to be a senior government official who understands how to balance these concerns.
Huh.
So it's not like a regular U.S. taxpayer like you or I who we pay our taxes. We're just a taxpayer. A church is very different legally because the government's not allowed to interfere in the conduct of a church, unless it's a criminal matter, of course.
Right.
Now, the same thing happened. There's a televangelist named Kenneth Copeland.
Oh, yeah, I know him.
Yeah, well, Kenneth Copeland, and when I was a young man in the Christian church, I met Kenneth Copeland at a Full Gospel Businessman's Retreat hosted by Dima Shakarian way back in the 70s. And, I got to tell you, he's one of the most intense people I've ever met. Really intense. He spent like a half hour talking to me at this retreat. We're just out in the woods walking. And Brother Copeland, he's very intense, very smart. He's a pilot. This guy's powerful,
Yeah.
And he's no one's fool. When the IRS wanted to look at him, he said no. And he got his attorneys. So you have to understand, you have a lot of religious people who are powerful, who have a lot of sophisticated tax attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
And in America, you're allowed to use attorneys to represent you to argue with government agencies.
Right.
And this 2007 case where the IRS actually got struck down has become a roadblock.
Yeah,
So,
this is really interesting because basically what we're talking about here is, to try to put this in more simple or layman's terms, is there are a number of roadblocks here that have not necessarily all been erected on purpose, and yet still there they are. And there are these hidden loopholes and there are these hidden things that go on that are not generally in the public eye, and so people think that it's simpler or easier or more common sense than it really is.
true. And so what I'm trying to do is just give people what when we say Scientology's tax exemption should be revoked, that's easy to say but hard to do.
Right.
But it is doable. Now,
yes, for sure. All we're trying to do here is define the roadblocks. We're not saying that they are unpassable.
true. And in fact, in the 1993 closing agreement between the IRS and the Church of Scientology, the final draft was leaked by the Wall Street Journal in 1997. There's a stipulation that this agreement between the Church of Scientology and the IRS is final and conclusive, except one, the matter relates to may be reopened in the event of fraud, malfeasance, or misrepresentation of material facts. I've argued to the IRS that there was fraud, that in applying for its tax exemption, Church of Scientology, I allege, has committed fraud. They said there was a system of governments inside the Church of Scientology, and there's not a system of governance. And from working that David Miscavige is the managing agent of the church.
That's right.
He runs the place. There's boards of directors on paper, and there should be 7 boards and trustees and directors and checks and balances, but there's not. They've all been collapsed.
Exactly. And you and I actually spoke about this in some detail before, and I detailed all of this in my book on the chapter on tax exemption, how just a few of the lies that were told by the Church of Scientology to the IRS in order to get their tax exemption in the first place.
Yes, you did. And tell the audience just a few.
Well, yeah, like the whole corporate structure thing, like you were just mentioning with David Miscavige, the fact that refunds are easy to get, the fact that they had certain things allocated, like I think you brought up the the obelisks.
Oh yeah, they were going to build a
Right.
series of 12 obelisks throughout the world.
That's right.
with the moral code of the way to happiness engraved on them.
That's right. Which I to this day, it still obviously tickles me because it's so ridiculous, and they haven't done anything about that. And that was, well, over 20 years ago that they said they were going to be doing that project.
Sure.
You know?
What's funny, just to interject, if Scientology had actually built 12 giant obelisks,
Yeah.
What is an obelisk? Well, the Washington Monument, and that's an obelisk, right?
That's true. That's right. That's right.
If they had built 12 of these things throughout the world, those would be attention-getting.
Yes, they would.
And the glory they missed by not building 12 giant Scientology obelisks, to me, it's really funny because it's ambitious, but they could have done it. They have the money.
Easily. They're just kind of make one stupid move after another. And also, of course, the entire structure of Scientology, we know, that it doesn't have to take a full legal piercing the corporate veil in order to see that the officers and board members and various things that they listed, half of those people aren't even in the Sea Org anymore. And, or certainly are not on posts or positions of authority. And this is not hard to show. No,
and the other thing, I think there's misrepresentation of material fact goes right to refunds and repayments.
Yep.
The Church of Scientology told the IRS it was very easy to get refunds or repayments.
And if you look at how easy, this isn't a refund payment specifically, but if you look at how they've been messing around with Luis Garcia on that whole case, you see that their arbitration doctrines or procedures are a mess. And that kind of it's a similar boat to the refund repayment line, which is why I bring that up.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of a repayment, this is where Scientology can get very misleading for new Scientology watchers. The Church of Scientology asks you to put money on account for future services. So I'm a Church of Scientology salesperson or registrar, and I say to you, Chris, put $100,000 on account for future services.
Yep.
And this is akin to Christianity asking you, give a seed faith offering. It's all the same thing. We want your money now. We'll deliver your auditing later, right?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And this is very commonplace. This is not unusual. This is the usual way they get money out of people.
Yes, it is. And so you Chris, you're a businessman in the Midwest, and you kick in 100,000.
Mm-hmm.
But then you decide you don't want to be a Scientologist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You just I'm not with the program. I don't like what's happening in my church. For whatever reason, even L. Ron Hubbard said a Thetan can change his mind.
Yes.
or her mind.
That's right.
You just decide, look, this Scientology business is not for me.
Yep.
That's all, okay? And you don't even have a bone to pick. You're just like, you know what, I grew up Catholic, I'm going to go back Catholic, and for whatever reason, right?
Yep.
So you want your $100,000 back because you're not going to use the future services you were induced to donate for, right?
That's right. What they call advance payments.
Yeah, but this is misleading because when they say advance payments or money on account, it makes you think you have a bank account.
Exactly.
With your money in it. But guess what? When you want your money back, the church goes, sorry, that was a donation.
That's right.
There's no law in America requiring a church to return your donation. So you're not getting your money back. Okay, so you write another letter and say, look, I want my money back. And they'll say, well, then you have to complete the claims verification board routing form.
Mm-hmm.
But then there becomes a problem there too. Because let's say if you had spoken out against the church and you were declared a suppressive person.
Yep.
Well, guess what? You can't complete the routing form because as a suppressive, you're not allowed to step onto church property, and you can only complete the CVB routing form on church property.
That's right.
So as we've discussed, it's a nasty catch-22. But it's important to reiterate, this is misrepresentation of material fact. They told the IRS it was easy to do. They didn't tell the IRS, okay, we're gonna rig this thing and so it's like a rigged casino, so you're not going to get your money back. The clear intent by their own behavior and letters, is they say, no, the whole goal is to keep that money. And periodically, I guess, Marty Rathbun in one of his blogs a long time ago before he changed, he said that periodically when the pressure would get great, they would do some refunds and repayments. But in general, what happens legally, they want to just wear you down so you legally abandon your claim, because there's wiggle room. They told the IRS they handle refunds and repayments on a meet or abandon basis. So they have to meet it or get you to abandon it. And if they wear you out over 2-3 years, 200-300 emails, and they just wear you down until and you abandon it, then legally you have abandoned your claim, and then they can argue later that you abandon it. And the more time passes, the more time is on their side legally. So this is really bad faith. It's really bad faith written by malicious lawyers. That's my allegation.
And another thing that I just was thinking about in terms of their misrepresentation on this exact point was, I recall in the filings they did with the IRS when they were doing the question and answer back and forth, is they specifically said, the Church of Scientology specifically claimed that when people made those advance payments, that they actually did have it set aside in some reserve account or something, so that if there was a refund request, the money could be paid back straight away. And I knew immediately, total lie, that is not true at all. When you request when that money goes into the church's coffers, it is immediately spent and run through the various allocations, and percentages go up to Church of Scientology International and that sort of thing. And if you ask for a refund, that church you're asking for a refund from, let's say it's Denver Church of Scientology, they have to make that money newly in order to pay you back, which is one of the reasons it's such a nightmare trying to get money out of them.
Yeah, and there's no financial transparency. They did tell the IRS that when a request for a refund or repayment is made, that money's put into the CVB account, but it's not. And see, this is one of the problems. In America, churches have zero financial transparency.
Right.
And unless they have unrelated business income, they don't have to file these 990s that I have on the Scientology Money Project. And I haven't been able to update my 990s on Scientology. As it appears, Scientology has quit filing them. That is, they've quit making, they stopped making unrelated business income. And
that's interesting.
Well, that's something I'm working on right now. I'm investigating. There's always means in the government to find things out.
Yep.
And so I'm pursuing the means allowed me by U.S. law. But the bigger picture of bad faith, misrepresentation of fact, I mean, it's, why does this organization have tax exemption when it behaves like a business? It's not doing what it told the IRS it would do. And that means it's not doing what it told the U.S. government it would do. And so really, the church enjoys the protection of U.S. law, and yet it's not doing what it told. It obtained tax exemption. It's not doing what it told the IRS it would do. So that's really the basis. The IRS can open an investigation on that basis.
And we hope they do.
Well, the petition becomes very important because the IRS responds to public pressure, as does the U.S. government. And this is why if you get a couple 100,000 signatures or 1 million, and instead of just you and I talking right now, Chris, I'm talking on behalf of the 10,000 plus people who've signed the signature. Now, Leah Remini's talking on behalf of the millions of people who watch her show. And so public pressure needs to be brought to bear on the IRS to just do its job.
Exactly.
And I want to make this distinction. The Church of Scientology is what our attention's on, but the agency that has to do its job is the IRS. And all I'm saying in my petition is the IRS, do your job. There are misrepresentation of facts. There is fraud. You could argue there's malfeasance. And you need to open an investigation, and it has to go to the IRS commissioner. And he needs to call for an investigation, and that's what we're asking for in the petition. and we do have the right to petition our government for the redress of grievances, and then the church could make its case. But Chris, changing topics for a minute here.
Yeah.
The Church of Scientology, and you were in the Sea Org for 20 years, 17 years, call it 20, whatever. I'm sure in Sea Org years it's 500 years.
Yeah, exactly. It's more like 10,000, but yeah.
But changing gears a little bit to some topical things.
Yeah.
The Church of Scientology is clearly gripped in a crisis.
Yeah, I would say that that's accurate.
Yeah, it's a crisis of leadership, a crisis of image, a crisis of not knowing what to do. And I want to interview you partly.
Oh, sure. Yeah, what you got?
So the other day on the Underground Bunker, Tony Ortega's famous Underground Bunker, he said it appears that the RPF may have been ended, and we were talking about that. Could you comment? What's your opinion on that? What's your take?
Absolutely, and it's funny, in fact, because Aaron and I had a discussion about this as well, and I am actually holding off on accepting that is true. I definitely read the article with interest, and I had discussions with other, ex-members and whatnot, but I have a hard time. I need more verification of that before I will believe that the RPF has been canceled as a practice. I will say that the RPF has gone down to 0 members in the past. There was an amnesty back in 1991, for example, where they just excused everybody who was on it and put them back on posts and this sort of thing. But then, it built back up again. And I would say that that's more likely what's happened than they've canceled the use of the RPF, because I believe that the RPF is in the very DNA of the Sea Org. And so I would just need to see more on that before I can totally believe that.
I agree with you here. The 1991 action where they excused everyone from RPF, my opinion is they did that just strictly for window dressing because they were reapplying to the IRS for tax exemption. So
yeah, the timing on that does fit into that, doesn't it?
Well, you always have to look at timing because, if they have IRS officials asking them about what is this religious prison camp you're running, the RPF.
Yeah.
If they have nobody on it and it's just something, it's just something there that's, nobody's in it now, that could be argued to be a misrepresentation. It's kind of like before the night. Here's what's interesting, Chris. Another parallel we can talk about. Marshall Goldblatt was a wealthy Scientologist. And he was a friend of Karen, and when she was married to Heber, they knew Marshall. He was very wealthy. He's the guy who actually wrote the check to buy the Pacific Base complex, the old Cedars Hospital.
Wow, that is pretty wealthy.
Yeah, he had, I think it was $10 million. He wrote the check to buy that. Now Marshall bought that, and the old Pac Base, Big Blue, as it's called around here, it was a dumpy hospital that had been sitting empty, and it needed a lot of work. It was really run down. It just needed a huge amount of work.
That's right.
And, so suddenly a lot of Sea Org members were coming up as what are called List 1 rock slammers.
That's right.
Which is a bad thing in Scientology. When you're on being security checked on the cans, if you have a List 1 rock slam, if the needle slams violently, you're in trouble.
Oh, that is an instant RPF assignment.
Bingo. And they needed a big workforce to renovate the old Cedars Hospital into Pacific Base. So guess what? There were suddenly hundreds of List 1 rock slammers who were sent to the RPF to renovate their building they just bought.
That's right. This is in Sea Org, this is actually an infamous time period of this.
Yes.
In the Sea Org, this time period stands out as infamous.
What was said about it in the Sea Org? What's the inside scoop?
Just that. Well, see, here's what happened: is they did that. they renovated the base, and then only after all the work gets done does L. Ron Hubbard come out looking like the hero, because he says, what? All these people went to the RPF, but the person who did, but these rock slams weren't really rock slams. They were misreading those meters. This is ridiculous. Cancel all these RPF assignments right now. And Hubbard, who instigated this nonsense, is, comes out as, oh, it's all this woman, I think her name was Laurel's fault or something, this woman's fault. And she goes to the RPF and for her gross misreading of an e-meter, and everybody else is like, oh, thank God Ron came in and reviewed it and saved the day. It's just like, are you kidding me with this, And that's what happens.
See, that's why I'm saying, at the scamminess of it, suddenly the Commodore says, oh, well, there's a problem here. These weren't List 1 rock slammers. Take these people out of RPF. And I'm glad you said it was an infamous period, because it's always so scammy in Scientology. So
yes.
So everyone's a List 1 rock slammer when they need labor force. When remodeling's done, you're not. When they're reapplying to the IRS to get their income tax exemption back that they lost in 1967, there's no RPF.
Mm-hmm.
And there's refunds, and there's boards of directors, and everything is just really cross every T, dot every I. We've purged the Guardian's office, even though they didn't.
That's right.
I mean, a lot of the old geo-crims, as they call them, are in the Sea Org, right?
That's right. Or they're working for the Office of Special Affairs as contractors or whatever,
Yeah, there's always a workaround.
That's right.
That's why, on Tony Ortega's bunker today, you have the 50th anniversary pictures of the Sea Org that he posted.
Yes.
And you have David Miscavige, and in the engine room of the Free Winds. In
a shirt I commented on it, I really don't think he sees the irony of wearing a shirt that probably costs what a Sea Org member would take 3 or 4 months to make. That's how much his shirt probably cost.
Oh, absolutely.
And he doesn't even see the irony, I'm sure.
No, and in fact, generally when you go into an engine room of a ship, you don't wear a shirt that's been, professionally dry cleaned and pressed.
That's right.
Like it's not a work shirt. It's like a guy taking your time.
He's got his hand casually in his pocket as though he's just hanging with the guys down in the engine room, and you're just like, what is up with this? I was beside myself when I saw those pictures. I couldn't believe how bad it was.
No, but look at it's a PR gesture.
Of course.
And they you made the note, and I liked it. They ripped off Annie Leibovitz.
Yes.
Her famous style. I mean, they have the Christian cross they've ripped off. And now they're ripping off Annie Leibovitz, and people could spot that a mile away. Her work is so iconic.
Yep, that's right.
And they know that the IRS is looking at them. They know that.
Mm-hmm.
And they know a lot of attention is on their tax exemption, and that's their barrier. So that's why, going back to the petition, no matter what Scientology says, what you have to look at is what it's doing. Is it giving refunds and repayments? No. Is it still practicing disconnection, breaking up families? Yes.
That's right.
Is it still publishing hate and smear websites on people who speak out? Yes. Is it still engaging? Is it still hiring PIs? Yes. I mean, it's still the same old thing.
That's right.
So that's why I focus on what they do and not their slick, glossy PR magazines. For example, here's something, Chris, that a Scientologist who's in the church, who's in good standing, should be concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
Scientology Media Productions, David Miscavige spent upwards of $100 million on that facility. And he promised that there would be Scientology programming on air.
That's right. In fact, it was supposed to start airing or broadcasting this summer. And we're now into October.
It was back in 2016 he said it would be airing.
That's right. They're way over target.
But see, in terms of tax exemption, when a church raises money for a specific purpose, such as a studio, and promise to do certain things, the IRS, they have to, by the law, comply with it. Now, Scientology has some wiggle room. They could say IAS money, it's for the broad purposes of defending the church or dissemination, right? They have some wiggle room.
Mm-hmm.
But if I were a Scientologist, they took almost 20 years to open the superpower building.
Yep.
That was completely fraudulent. That was just money raising. That was the most profitable empty building in the world.
By far, millions and millions and millions of dollars.
Yeah, and you could argue that the Luis Garcia lawsuit triggered the opening of that. It was a knee-jerk reaction.
I think that's exactly what happened.
Yeah. Well, that's the popular opinion. I don't know, but that seems to be a proximal event.
Yep.
Now, Scientology Media Productions, for all the church's money, they're not broadcasting anything on any cable show anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
They're not even, and Chris, this is the amazing thing. They're producing hate websites.
Exactly. That's right. The only product out of this place so far is Marty Rathman's videos. And I'll say that that's conjecture on my part. I will
say allegedly.
Allegedly, that's right.
Yeah.
But you are not seeing any programming. That is black and white. There is nothing.
Yeah, and that goes to tax exemption. You raised money for it. You said you would do it. You're not doing it. That's a concrete item the IRS could look into.
Yes.
Why do you have this big empty studio? And they also promised that other religious groups could use the studio. That was in the language of their press release. They were going to allow people like the Nation of Islam, other religious groups, to use their facilities. That has not happened to my knowledge.
No, I don't think it has either. I think we would have heard about that. And I actually was not aware of that. My eyes are like, oh, really? That's interesting.
There was a press release. They were trying to argue that this, they were trying to be ecumenical. The Church of Scientology was trying to be ecumenical, saying this is for the betterment of the community, and we're going to let other religious groups. So, and one interesting thing about Hollywood, where I live, Chris, Karen, and I live,
mm-hmm.
is there's a lot of churches. There are a lot of churches here.
Yes, there are.
Representing, the Sikh church is just down the street from us. There's a Buddhist temple just down the street from us. Amy Semple McPherson's, where she started her religious movement is just down the street. So when you can go down, it's Angela's Temple. Dr. Gene Scott, his old church is over by Forest Lawn. So we have a lot of high-profile churches, big churches, right?
Mm-hmm.
And none of them, to my knowledge, have used Scientology Media Production Studios. So that offer appeared to, again, be more PR. And again, those types of representations are what the IRS can specifically look at. They can also look at governance, and they should look at governance. I've argued a long time that David Miscavige pierced all the corporate veils, and they were nervous about that in the Rathbun case, veil piercing.
Yes, and that is not a small deal. That is a huge deal.
That's enormous. That is enormous, and that's why I think the Rathbun case had to go away. That's just my opinion, right?
Yep, I agree with that. I do concur with you on that. I think that that was the major threat of the Rathbun case, was exposing that for what it was, and I believe that the church was and Miscavige were extremely motivated to get that case put down because of that.
Yeah, and I have absolutely no facts. This is just pure conjecture.
Yeah, we're just talking. But yeah.
And so there was that threat there. But there's also the superpower building, going back to that the IRS could look into. There's the basics the IRS could look into. And this is another bone of contention. If I were a Scientologist in good standing, I'd be concerned about. Now, this goes back to the basics release in 2006, 2007. And David Miscavige, Religious Technology Center, had represented to his parishioners that all the L. Ron Hubbard books and materials were ecclesiastically pure. He was selling the old stuff up until the day he released the basics. So why did he represent that they were ecclesiastically pure and had the imprimatur of the Religious Technology Center? And then he went, oops, they're not. There's malicious semicolons, there's SP transcriptionists, blah, 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 right?
Yep.
It's almost like a bait and switch. Well, wait a minute, up until the day you said, until you released the basics, I could bought these with the RTC imprimatur, and now you're telling me they're not? How long did you know there were problems? How long before you did anything? Why did you misrepresent it? Why didn't you stop selling them when you identified the problem with the SP transcription errors 5 years ago or 7 years ago?
Oh, I would just love to see them called on the carpet over that one.
Well, you could argue that he built a printing press having specific foreknowledge that he was going to release the basics, because when he opened up the new printing factory here in LA, he suddenly had the ability, he had high throughput
Oh,
publishing.
absolutely. I was on the ground for that. There's no question that facility was created specifically in order to be able to produce those materials. That's its primary function.
In order to produce the basics. So
yeah,
you could argue, you could ask David Miscavige, did you have knowledge that you were going to resell the basics and that the books you were selling and representing as ecclesiastically pure were going to have to be reissued because of errors you knew about?
Oh yeah, very definitely.
Now that's a fair question asked.
Yeah.
Now legally, I don't know anything about statute of limitations, things like that. I'm not a lawyer, but you just start looking at all the out points.
Right.
And that's what the IRS needs to do, is you're supposed to keep in the integrity of 501c3 tax exemption.
Yep.
And you have the activity to police this.
It's not, yeah, exactly. I think that it's not difficult to find these things. We need to get these guys to look. And, between the pressure from your petition and the work that we're doing to get those signatures, that is really, really important. And the pressure that's coming from Leah's show, I think, is also contributory to this as well.
Yes, and even with people like Paul Haggis speaking out.
Yes.
Mike Rinder. And so the Church of Scientology watches all of this. But generally, Chris, my opinion is the Church of Scientology is not going to change a damn thing unless there's either public pressure or legal pressure.
Yes, correct.
So therefore, the petition calling for an investigation into their tax exemption has to combine both. That's why I'm asking your listeners to go to change.org, and if you could
the link will be posted on
hey, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. At sensiblyspeaking.com, where this podcast is hosted, you will find the link, and on YouTube in the show notes description section you will find the link to that petition.
And I appreciate everyone who has signed and helped promote it, but if you could sign it and share it right now at 10,192 signatures, if everyone shared and just got one other person to sign, we jump up to 20,000. And at a certain point, it becomes exponential and it will go viral. That's my prediction.
Yep, exactly. And you don't have to be a former Scientologist to sign it. You don't have to know anything about this, really, other than that could we please get an investigation going? And I think a lot of people would back that up.
Yeah, and one question I want to answer for people who've written me, you do not have to be a U.S. citizen to sign it. This is a petition and not an election.
Oh, good point.
So if you live outside the United States, you're free to sign it because it is just simply a petition, and people have the right to sign it. Mm-hmm. And I think people in the Western world should be concerned about the menace that's the Church of Scientology. They should be concerned about it. Look, given the bad faith of the Church of Scientology, the disconnection, the breaking up of families, RPF, Sea Org slave labor, the use of child labor. Chris, the church uses child labor. If you go onto their website now, they say we comply with all applicable child labor laws. That's, like I've said so many times, that's horrible. That's something a church should never say.
Right, exactly.
And as I remarked to the Headley case, you should never say, hey, we beat those human trafficking charges in court. They should have never come up in the first place.
Exactly.
Nor should your declaration that we follow all applicable child labor. Are you kidding? You're using child labor?
Right.
You're not, and you're paying people pennies an hour to work. Adults, right. Seriously?
That's right.
You're not even giving them anything close to a living wage.
That's right.
I mean, is that really what you're about, Scientology? So the public outrage is palpable and the church feels it, and we just have to keep up the pressure.
Yep.
I don't think Scientology reforms. I think the government has to step in.
It's the only time that positive changes are made within the church culture and structure. The enforced abortions only stopped after former members came out and went public with that information. This business with the RPF, and the whole, that only stopped when former members came out and exposed it, and the media took it and ran with it. That is what creates change within a destructive cult like Scientology.
And that's very well said, Chris. And one thing Scientology is fundamentally about is imposing its will on the world.
Yes.
Now, and it has done it before. It's had the money and the threats. It could do a lot of things. It can't do that anymore, especially in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell people, if you sign the petition, that Church of Scientology is not going to hire PIs to follow you around or threaten you.
Absolutely not. They don't have the resources for that. No one should have any concern about putting their name loud and proud on this petition.
No, not at all. And in fact, your name doesn't even appear unless you want it to. So, and you can, it's just a gesture, but it's important that I'm asking people to contribute, to make the gesture of signing it, because it's saying no to a harmful and destructive cult.
Mm-hmm. That's
and
right.
This is the momentum that continues. And like I said, 10,192, that's a lot of people. But I wanted to get to hundreds of thousands or 1 million. That's why I'm reaching out to shows like yours, and I appreciate the opportunity to promote the petition and talk about this problem that we have in the U.S.
Exactly.
And I hope it enlightens people both in America and outside of America about why Scientology can do what it's able to do. And Chris, I'll send you a link to my Scientology Money Project. I have the very technical reasons in the court case, and I have all the statutory language. And if people out there have access to promote it, if they're already in the media or they're in a community, maybe lawyers, even bloggers, just whatever communities you're in, book clubs, whatever you're in, if you can promote it through your communities, this is truly a grassroots effort. I'm not asking for money. I'm not raising money.
And yeah, it's just a signature.
Yeah, it is. It is.
That's
and
right.
So,
actually, my challenge to everybody out there is, look, I want to see my Facebook feed blow up with links to this thing. I want to see my Twitter feed blow up with links to this thing. I want to see everybody sharing this and getting it out there. That is really the only way that we're going to drive the signatures up to a number that is going to be impressive enough to actually get the IRS commissioner to take notice. And so, if you guys out there are like, what are we going to do? What do we do? How do I help? This is how you help. This is what you do.
Yeah, and without going into specific details, and I can't do that, I can assure your listeners that I can get into the IRS commissioner's office and have a meeting. I can cause that to happen.
Excellent.
I have the connections. I know what I need to do. There's already a roadmap in place. And what I'm going to do is I update my petition every night or every other night.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to link your show, so when I send it out to the 10,000 plus people who've signed it, they'll be able to hear our podcast. But I just want, people have asked me, yes, there is a plan in place. There's a roadmap. And obviously, we're not going to broadcast it at the Church of Scientology.
Of course not.
And so the petition will keep running on an indefinite basis. And then when I get to a certain threshold, then I can get a meeting at the IRS. I'll work with change.org, but I'll work with some other people to get into the actual IRS. And that's when I go back to Washington, D.C.
Great.
And I have every confidence of getting a meeting and presenting our case.
Great.
Because we're allowed to by law. And the church will be allowed to present its case, but at least finally this will come to the attention of the IRS in a formal administrative hearing.
Yep.
And then what happens from then is an IRS determination. But at least we'll get it to that place. And that's really the goal, is to get it in front of the IRS commissioner.
Okay, good. Good. Well, then we've made that clear, and I think everybody out there is getting the message loud and clear on this. So, are there one last question before we start wrapping up here? Are there any other common questions that have come up that you think people should get the answer to here?
Well, let me repeat. You do not have to be a United States citizen to sign.
Good.
Once you've signed it, please promote it. And yes, something can be done about it. You can petition the IRS. I guess what I would say, Chris, is the petition is part of answering the question, why isn't anything happening?
Mm-hmm.
And I've explained it on the Money Project link, which you'll put up.
Yep.
But there is an actual way to get the IRS to move on that, but it's very specific within law. And it's not enough to just say, do something about it. You actually have to make it happen. And I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to be one of the people who really helps make it happen. And I have other people working with me, helping me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, to borrow a phrase from Scientology, something can be done about it.
Exactly.
In this case, something can be done about getting the IRS to investigate Scientology's tax exemption. Not only can something be done, something should be done. And the agency that should do it is the IRS, and the specific person, the IRS, is the IRS commissioner. And those are the exact steps that need to be happen. A petition really helps a lot because it makes a formal statement of public interest from a lot of people that this is an issue of concern the IRS needs to address. So this is, along with shows, Leah Remini's show, other efforts being made, this makes a big difference to have a petition with a couple 100,000 or 1 million names on it. That makes our government take notice.
Exactly. Perfect. Okay, Jeff. Well, thank you very much for your time on this and for the information you've given. I think everybody's definitely on the same page with this, and so let's get it out there, folks. And also, any comments, questions, feedback, go ahead and leave it in the show in the here on YouTube or at sensiblyspeaking.com. If you have a question for Jeff, how would they contact you, Jeff, directly?
Well, the best way would leave it in comments of your blog, and we'll just do another show.
Perfect. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So that's how we will do that, folks. Jeff, thank you very much again for coming around and doing this.
A pleasure, as always.
Excellent. And thanks for listening, folks. I will talk to you guys next week. Bye-bye.